everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Give Freedom a Chance, the new format for the Libertarian Party UK, where we try to discuss everything related to freedom and how it can affect our lives day to day. Thank you for being here, notwithstanding the fact that we keep shifting the time of our live shows every time, but it's just there is a reason for that, and I'll get a little bit more into that. We have a great lineup of guests tonight. One actually is just joined us and is the main guest of the evening. As you have seen from the social media post and everything, we will talk about a thing that has become a kind of like a fact of life. Nowadays, the idea that cities are becoming more and more unlivable, that is really difficult to actually afford to live there, that once they were regarded as the pinnacle of civilization, the places where you had to go if you wanted to lead a great life. And nowadays, people are running away from them because they're becoming more and more complex, more and more expensive, more and more dangerous. And so nowadays, we're just thinking, well, is it really a fact of life? Is it something that is unavoidable with modernity? Well, our main guest tonight actually has a different vision of actually what can be the modern city, the modern metropolis. And it's a future where it doesn't become a totalitarian nightmare, but it goes back to its origin. It becomes, again, a free city, like it was in the Middle Ages. But obviously, modernity brings it with it. So it's a free and private city. They can actually be the future. This is actually something that it could offer, completely changing the dynamic, the narrative that dominates current speak. And obviously, we think that this could bring a lot of more freedom into our lives. Obviously, I will just introduce all of our guests tonight for our panel. And just allow me a second to just turn the microphone on again. And here we have all of them. I think we have a feed. I think, yeah, no, sorry. It's just we have a major feedback on that. So obviously the leader of the Libertarian Party, our host, Alex Zychowski. Hi, Alex.
Good evening.
And also we have Patrik Schumacher, world-renowned architect, and obviously maybe the person that we have to thank for having so many great guests tonight. Thank you, Patrik, for being here. So, yeah, and obviously we also have our guest tonight, and is pretty much the person that we wanted to talk the most, and it's Dr. Titus Gebel, and he is a former entrepreneur, but most of all, is the person that is responsible for this new idea, this new way of thinking that can actually change the way we think about our cities and a freedom. So the kind of cities that are much more free, and they are actually become a lot more friendly towards business. So thank you, Dr. Titus, for being here.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Titus.
Hi, Patrik.
Yeah. I think there is a problem. We have a feedback from your microphone, which is actually really annoying. Sorry about that. It's just that okay, we'll just go on for that. So I just wanted to know, Dr. Stevens, I think, Patrik, you were talking before the live show, actually, what is this new way of thinking, and why the book that Dr. Gebel released a few years ago actually was really a game changer, and it started a massive conversation towards this new idea of rethinking the way that the city actually is thought of in modern terms. Can you please introduce that?
Well, I mean, I wanted to ask Titus to push the idea forward, but the way I wanted to pose the question is, can free private cities substitute for or be a path towards the libertarian revolution in advanced economies, maybe a libertarian revolution which we find hard to believe in these days when the majority seem to be wedded to statist, nanny statist lifestyle. So I think that was motivating the initial move, I think, to see that the libertarian parties don't gain sufficient momentum and you have to go somewhere else where you bring libertarians into points of concentration to start fresh, unencumbered by the incumbent populations, settled population. I mean, is that the motivation here, Titus?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is Luca is still. Do you still have an echo? I can switch to another microphone if that helps.
No. Well, actually,
it's good.
It's good. Okay.
No, the problem is that if we speak, we have a feedback on your microphone. It's just that. Yeah, no, that's not a problem. I will turn off the microphone when you're not speaking. So just raise a hand. It's just a problem. That's why headphones actually are. it's just a matter. Don't worry.
It's the first time we have that issue. So anyway,
yeah, I know.
Go on, Titus.
Yeah. Okay. I have tried to later. Okay. So the idea was indeed motivated by exactly what you said, Patrik.
Okay.
That is, there is no way, in my view, to reach a libertarian society by the ballot box, because what we advocate, freedom and self-responsibility, the majority is not demanding this, right? There's no demand for our ideas for the majority. And I found this out after being active in the classic liberal spectrum in Germany for more than 30 years. And my conclusion is, in current societies, especially Western democracies, it's impossible to create a libertarian society. It's maybe possible for a short period of time after crisis, like in West Germany, in Italy after World War II. After crisis, after war, maybe like in Argentina now, but give it 15 years. And that's also my prediction for Argentina, which is now on a very good path. But in 15 years, probably people will all have forgotten about why they elected Milei, and then the good guys, the redistribution guys, are voted into power again. And so I said, okay, is there any chance that we can get out of this vicious circle? And the answer is yes, if we practice what we preach. And what do we preach? We preach free markets. And I said, okay, then let's take these free markets where you have the right to bring new products on the market, but you cannot force people to buy it. Let's bring this thought into our, what I call the market of living together. And that means Titus, for example, can be anybody else. My company is creating a new product. It's called a free city. And everybody has to pay something for security, infrastructure, independent dispute resolution, because these things cost money. But other than that, you're free to do as you choose. And now comes the main difference. Everybody has a citizen's contract, a bilateral service contract. And the beautiful thing about this contract is it cannot be changed by either party unilaterally, and it can also not be changed by third parties. Third parties are, for example, your fellow citizens who say, we have another view than you and we are the majority. And I can tell them then, well, bad luck, because I have a bilateral contract with the operator, and the operator and I have agreed that this is what I have to pay. And that is what I can say. So I don't have to pay for Ukraine war. I don't have to pay for police arresting me for making wrong postings, because it's not in my contract. And that is, I think, a solution to the insolvable problem of democracies, that they are constantly setting the wrong incentives. The majority can be easily convinced that they can vote money into their pockets if they just vote for us, and then it's a much better, I would say, legal protection for the individual because there's no forum like a parliament that can be hijacked by a group of people and saying, okay, now we're changing all the rules. Because the biggest problem I see in contemporary Western societies is not so much that there's high taxes. It's a problem, but that alone would not really be the killer. The problem is that in the so-called social contract, one side is constantly changing the rules every year, and it's never you. It's always the government side. So that is impossible in a free city, free private city, privately governed, where you have this contract between citizens and the city operator. And that is indeed, and coming back to Patrik's remark, that is indeed my solution to the problems we are currently in. So that the party is always voted that promises the most, and the other parties have also at least promised a lot, free lunch to get elected, which eventually leads to the financial ruin of the societies. Actually, our Western states are already insolvent since decades. And insofar, you cannot vote yourself out of that problem. So this is my analysis, my finding, but I've also presented a solution, and I'm also working on making it real.
So yeah, this is. Oops, sorry, let me turn off the microphone. It's very interesting because this is actually the point. The thing that I'm noticing, I've been following politics and I've been writing on politics for most of my life, around 40 years. So this is a tendency that especially urban centers become more and more left-wing. So obviously it's more totalitarian and stuff. So this has been a given. So not just New York that elected Mamdani, which is a strange blend of socialism and actually communism and totalitarian thinking and Islamism and so on. But the more stuff is San Francisco, Los Angeles, London, God forbid London, and everything. So this is actually something that has been the current thing. While in terms in rural areas is just like your neighbor. So it's not atomized society. So maybe this is why rural areas actually are more easy to just have an idea about what freedom is all about. So this is actually something that could be. But right now, living in a city has become almost impossible. But I was just wondering exactly how can you just get the critical mass to have this project starting? Because I think that I would love to. My brother still lived in London, but if London became a free, private, international city, that would be great, amazing. I would just think maybe moving back, because I left London 2018 before it got really bad. So I don't know, this is something, but how can you get to a critical mass? Because in theory, it's outstanding. I seem to remember there is a small town near Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States that decided to just incorporate itself and get rid of firefighters, public police and stuff, and become almost private. And this experiment is actually working really well. But
you're referring to Sandy Springs. Maybe
yes.
Try it again with my new headphone. So I'm
now works perfectly. Works perfectly.
I've
Thanks.
Upgraded. So indeed, this is Sandy Springs, and the creator of Sandy Springs, Oliver Porter, is a friend and advisor to us. So I'm relatively well connected to this space, and Patrik is a frequent guest to our annual conference, where not all but most of these projects are coming together and exchanging their experience and their ideas, which is also a difference to libertarian projects in the past, like the Minerva project in the 1970s, or what Werner Stiefel did in Central America. Now we are all connected with each other. We can exchange our ideas and our experiences and our views and can help each other. And that is making me confident that we will eventually be successful. But to your initial question, Luca, how can we achieve that the critical mass is coming? And that is indeed the most important question. after that, how do you get autonomy by negotiating with states? I will say something to that, but it's possible. Critical mass depends a little bit on the help of the legacy governments to become worse every year. So we are counting on them that they are. And I can talk. I mean, I observe what's happening in the UK, and UK for me is one of the first candidates for a civil war in Europe. I live in Monaco. My wife is originally French, so we are recognizing what's happening in France, another failed state, and I'm German, and so I do follow a lot what's happening in Germany, and I can tell because I have the best insights into Germany, of course, naturally. I can say that the government and the official establishment are far from recognizing any own mistakes or thinking that they should change course significantly. And I remember that Keith Starmer, when challenged by President Trump and Vice President Vance, sit down and said, that's not true. We still have free speech in the UK. And at the same time, they are arresting, I don't know, 1,000 people a month for social media posts. And you ask yourself, what's wrong with these people that they do not recognize their own behavior and the consequences? And I think this is also a function of a negative selection over the decades in democratic systems, that the people who are now governing our countries, Macron might be a bit of a special type because he's certainly intelligent, more capable than others, but he's maybe has other issues. But this is clearly to me that it's not that there are people who say, okay, we maybe made a mistake. How can we re-steer the country and bring everybody on board? That's not happening. The only answer these people have is let's establish more censorship, let's establish more regulation, and let's just forbid the opposition parties. And this is definitely not a democracy any longer in the classical sense we had, that there's a plurality of opinions and parties. This is clearly leading more and more towards an authoritarian regime, and people are recognizing that because people are put in prison if they speak out against it. So what I want to say with it is, in the next years, we will not see that this course is changing, which makes more and more people realizing that we have a problem, that they are living in a system that is not working, in a regime that is taking their freedoms away. And more people will look out for other alternative places. And that's exactly what I need, because then these people will eventually recognize us, will discover us, and say, this is something that I might prefer. Let me check out this free city. Why can't I settle there? And this is what this is a process which will take years, but we are already in the midst of it. And I'm relatively confident that if we can now come up with more free cities, not only prosper in Morazan, Honduras, but we also have a potential new project in Brunei, and maybe other parties in that market have other projects popping up in the next 3 to 5 years, then suddenly you do have an alternative. And then it's only a question of time if people see that this is working. And I would say if our libertarian, classical liberal views are correct, then they should work. And then we will automatically attract the good people that you want to attract, also attracting a lot of normal people that just want to have a job, which is absolutely fine and legitimate. But this will then be a function of the establishment systems getting worse and worse, which puts more pressure on the people to look for alternatives, which plays into our cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I might come back on that, I mean, it's absolutely what we observe. I mean, we see this, the new immigration figures, there's a lot of outflow of people, and actually even indigenous British, white British people moving out, and we have immigration coming in, but the net is not so large, and we have a large outflow, and I see a lot of that going to Dubai. I see it actually from our own company, people bleeding out into Dubai. That's mainly tax, but also developers who find it too hard and risky to get anything going in Europe. They just buy a piece of land and get going, and so there's a lot of opportunities. So I wanted to pose the question. What are the key freedoms, let's say, which you would, if you're in the list of priority, over and above tax, let's say, which it would give your free private cities the edge, maybe also an edge over Dubai, which is at the moment quite attractive. And even I've been thinking, with these raising taxes and some other precious oppressions and impossibility of getting work done here, let's all decamp to Dubai. That's more and more happening, but which freedoms would you emphasize, which maybe are not available in Dubai?
Yeah, good point. I think definitely for me, it's legal stability and enforceability. That means foreseeability. That means that these are the rules you're bound to, and they're not going to be changed. The problem that you have in Dubai is this is all subject to the will of the leader. And even if you are following the existing rules, it's very, very dangerous, right? I mean, it's still Sharia law. If you touch somebody in a bar, this can put you in prison. And most of the time it's not enforced, but sometimes it is. If you write a critical article if you're living in Dubai, write a critical article about the Dubai leadership, then they will discover that you are, and that is a real case, that you are allowed to import alcohol, a certain amount, let's say 2 bottles, but you don't have a license to transport that alcohol from the border to where you live. And so they can arrest you on that basis. But the real reason is that you wrote this critical article. Dubai at the moment is very popular, and I've seen the same in my network. A lot of people have moved to Dubai in the last 3 to 5 years. It is kind of an international city already, which is fantastic, but it has not a legal stable system. And at the moment it's working because they leave most people alone, but not all. And insofar, I would say this is my main USP towards Dubai. What we normally also say, it's zero tax, free speech, and private property. That's what you have in a free city. It's zero tax is not completely true because you have to pay a fee, which is a kind of a head tax, but this is marginal compared to the taxes you pay. It's say it's 1,500 pounds per year, per person and per year. That's not much, but that is something you have to pay. So it's not really zero tax, but it's not a tax. It's a fee, and you know in advance that this is a fee for certain services, and if you do not provide these services, you can claim back part of your fees or even sue us for damages. Also something you cannot do as a taxpayer. But again, the more sophisticated answer would be we have legal clarity, legal stability. That is, Dubai doesn't have this, especially not legal stability. The ruler can change all the rules tomorrow. This is not possible in a free city where you're protected by this bilateral contract. And over time, people will find that out. At the moment, Patrik, this is a bit too legalese abstract. So people rather like this zero tax, free speech, private property element. But the other thing is very, very important. But it's a combination of all of these things, of course.
I mean, if I may just have a follow-up. So I'm a bit familiar with the Honduras Prospera project, which you were involved in as investor and as a legal advisor and helping to think through the legal code. And just to give a bit of more flesh to the bone there. So my understanding is in terms of industry regulations. Everybody can hook themselves up to any regulatory regime they might find in the world, which they, for their market they're addressing, might require. So there's nothing coming from Prospero itself, I suspect. And equally, I wonder in terms of employment law, there is none. There's probably all free contracting. There's no welfare system, obviously, but there is a kind of common law bundle, which you somehow have kind of imported. And I wonder are there certain segments like employment law is totally left out, and you just go for kind of contract law in general? How do you manage this? How do you kind of weed it out, some of the common law bundles, and how do you foresee the court system, which seems to be outsourced to some kind of former Supreme Court judges in the US, etc. In this case, is that the way you would also handle it in your next projects, let's say?
Yeah, it's a good question, an important point. I mean, our model is called international cities, because my original concept is called free private cities, and if you haven't heard it, just Google it. There's a book, there's a white paper, there's a foundation called Free Cities Foundation. But the problem is that free private cities is not an attractive term for politicians, because they have issues with the term free and the term private. So we rebranded it as international cities to make it a bit less controversial. And at the end of the day, we need governments to agree with us on that framework, as it has been done in Honduras. And you're right, we are proposing a common law framework, which is based on the traditional England, Wales / US common law. We would narrow it down to the principles and get all the postmodern woke ideas out of it. So it's going back basically to the basic rules and regulations and principles. And then it's more a tactical question. How can you make this possible in the world of today? And in the world of today, people can't understand that there was a world back then that did work on the basis of common law principles. And if there was a problem, you would go to court, and the court would then make a case law if there was no principle existing. And from then on, this would be the law of the land. Now, if you tell this anybody in any government in this world, they would say this is not possible because we need more regulation for this area, for that area, and you name it. And so, like people in Prospera, like people at my company, Tipolis, we have to adapt to that reality. And we say, okay, then we have a regulation for all these areas you're claiming, but it's much, much less dense than anything you have. And so what we came up with is we call it ICT code, International Cities by Tipolis Code, which is based on the common law. And then we have some extra regulation, which is relatively liberal, freedom-oriented for individual areas, so that the government is happy that these areas are regulated at all. Okay. And on top of that, we have some areas where we say this is different than every country because this is what the government says, but you must hold up this law or that law, our criminal code, or whatever they really want to uphold. And so we have our ICT code, and then we have a part 5 where it says, okay, this is the local amendments, and this is the outcome of a negotiation that you have with the government. So it's not a perfect world, but we are getting closer to the original idea that you do not need 10,000 of laws to live peacefully together. And this is normally a years long negotiation with the government. And people may say that this is so hard to get. Yeah, but it's even even this is much easier than to win an election. Right? So I have taken the burden, and my fellow co-workers and team members, we are doing that. We are negotiating every day. We are at the moment with 3 to 5 governments at the same time, trying to push the boundaries of liberty forward in order to have more liberty and less regulation. And that's what we do. And then it's the same what Prospera did, right? They tried in the framework that they inherited to not be blamed that they have no regulation, but say, yeah, we have regulation, but you can choose.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's legally too complicated. I would rather prefer to have a single law applicable. But what they did is at least an answer to this demand that you have to have some regulation, right? So and that is the world of today. That is where the environment we are working in.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I can see some parallels with the history, especially European history and stuff. Because you say, well, the cities in the Middle Ages, especially both in Germany and Italy, they became so the communes, and then the free cities like was Frankfurt or other great cities. They were just there because imperial authority was so decadent, so it was not possible to enforce all the laws. So he opened up avenues, and then the cities where the burghers were the free men that were not nobles, they said, well, now we can actually govern ourselves. And this was very tricky because obviously you had to have fights of powers, and so every right was conceded by the ruler, but at the same time you had to have some strength. So that the Hanseatic League and so on, they were just city governments and stuff. So right now I'm thinking this can be an alternative to other projects that have been ongoing, especially in the libertarian world. I remember, the Free State Project in New Hampshire and stuff, where they're saying, oh, let's all move to New Hampshire so that we will change that. And it's kind of working, not super great, but definitely working in a way. So it's actually quite interesting to say that, but right now I'm having the feeling that, as they said, no, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So these international cities, they look to me like the modern version of what happened in the Middle Ages. And obviously the governments are really helping us. I don't know if you've read, I think yesterday Mary Harrington wrote on Unheard, there was a really good article. It said why the Great Reset failed, and it's just because technocrats are not as smart as they would need to be. Absolutely. So this was the whole thesis.
I think. Let me come back to that thesis in a minute, but I think you're totally right when it comes to these free cities or free imperial cities in the Middle Ages, because they were not completely independent. They were still under the sovereignty of the emperor. But the emperor was weak, he had no standing army, had no standing administration. So factually, these cities were independent. And that took quite a while because, as you rightly said, there was a lot of fights against the bishops and princes and monarchs that were residing over these cities. And the people wanted to govern themselves because they said, our monarch is not even here. He doesn't even know what's happening here. And it took them about 200 years of fighting. But then, interestingly, then the whole thing flipped. Because then the monarchs saw, okay, these free cities, they're creating a lot of wealth. They're creating a lot of jobs. They're creating a lot of business also for the surrounding areas, which are my areas, as a prince. And so they suddenly started to invite the tradesmen to come and found new free cities, and they guaranteed freedom because they wanted to attract these businesses. And I see this happening again. It has already a front runner, the special economic zones. The number of special economic zones is increasing tremendously, which is a kind of governments competing with each other by granting special legal regimes. Well, it's nothing else than we want to do, right? We say, okay, the next logical step of a special economic zone is an autonomous city. It's a special economic zone with people. So you can attract talent that otherwise would not come to your place. And then you have, indeed, a very comparable situation to the Middle Ages, where more and more of these free cities were popping up. And for very similar reasons, now people want to be left alone by a coercive state, an overly regulative state, and too many tax burdens. They are escaping into free cities where they can not govern themselves. It's a difficult model, a different model now. They can govern themselves, but then they will end up with the same problems that the cities of the Middle Ages had. Then more and more people were entitled to vote. At the beginning was only the business people, the tradesmen, and then everyone. And then the free lunch guys were elected into power. All the problems that we have today were existing back then. So if we want to do better, we say, no, we are not interfering in people's lives. The city operator is really, really limiting himself to a very narrow framework, which is protection of life, liberty, and property. Everything else, the people associate themselves, they do whatever they want. So this is the market answer of today, where people have recognized with one part of their brain, some, with the libertarians, for example, but also many others say, free markets are working better because they have a better price mechanism and they can cover shortages better because of price discovery. People are working on their own good, which they all want to do. So that's why free markets work better. But I'm not capable of transferring this from this part of the brain to the other part of the brain where it says, how do we live together? And my answer is exactly the same. There's somebody offering a product to protect your life, liberty, and property. If he's not performing well, move to the next service provider. And this is basically the situation that we are in at the moment. And because we are talking about UK, also, I had a glimpse of hope when Boris Johnson was elected, because he said, we do everything new, and his advisor, Dominic Cummings or so, I don't know, Dominic Jennings.
Cummings.
They said, we are open to all ideas. And I wrote him a letter. I said, look, Boris Johnson said, after Brexit, we want to re-establish special economic zones in the UK, 10 of them all over the UK, and they will be prosperous. And I said, that's a great idea, but then please use that opportunity to create kind of Hong Kongs that have really a different model, and you can try out different things, and don't make it only for companies, make it really for people. And you have all the chance to do something else. Not only that I didn't get any response. What they eventually created was 1980s style free ports. So the most boring and the most outdated special economic zone concept, which the Middle East far has left behind, even in the 1990s. So that is what you said, Luca, is the complete lack of creativity of politicians. There is absolutely zero idea how they can create a future. And I told people, look, I'm on outside watching what's happening in the UK, but I'm not surprised that the Conservative Party has lost the last election, because everything they did was exactly the same the left wokists are doing. So why should anybody vote Conservative for that, right?
Yeah, it's just like voting Conservative is just like having Labour light. So just Labour but slower, because the end result is the same.
Exactly, and who needs that? So, and they had a chance, and maybe this is a thing for the Libertarian Party, because again, if you believe me, libertarian views will never gain majority in a democratic election. Maybe in 100 years, but not now. So the only chance that I see to make libertarian ideas real is to create these experimental sandboxes, these enclaves where only volunteers go. And you sell this to the government, say, let's try out different things and say what works best, and then we can take over some of these elements for the country, if there's a majority for that. But that is our only chance, I would say, in the UK to somehow convince the next government, be it Nigel Farage or whoever, saying, now this time we try really to make some special zones, not free ports, not 1980 free ports. You might 21st century special administrative regions. One country, two systems. And it's only for volunteers, and we try out things. You can even create a communist zone, right? Nobody will go there because they only want.
Oh, dear God. We already have that. We already have New York, San Francisco, and stuff. If you want, go.
But now the people are claiming that many people from the left are claiming that this is still capitalism. Say, okay, then make your own thing, right? I know the problem.
This is the whole. It's been said since forever. It's never real communism because real communism is impossible. So it's not only utopian. They say, well, no, it's not communism. It hasn't been done right. Well,
no, it hasn't
forget
been done right.
that.
Now we can do it right, right? I said, now we can do it right. Yeah, this is your land. Show us. The problem in reality would be that everybody who wants universal basic income will move there. But nobody who is willing to pay the universal basic income to the others is moving there. So I predict this now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to just bring in this Free Cities Foundation. Yeah. So you have your business Tipolis, and you're developing these projects, and then you have the Free Cities Foundation, which I'm happy to be an ambassador. And you do a number of interesting things. You have this kind of Free Cities register where you collect information of all the free cities projects and intentional communities, etc., around the world. And that's a wonderful resource. And you also have this kind of whole research on the history and of special economic zones, how they've been kind of proliferating. And so there's also, I think this movement needs to be supported by this kind of scholarly discourse. Also, interestingly, is some of this history of the three imperial cities, or like Vera Kishanova's work on Odessa, which is very interesting case. So I think that's very important to support the thinking and point to empirical examples, to things ongoing now, things in history. And I think that is something which the Free Cities Foundation is delivering, as well as putting up this wonderful conference every year in Prague. So yeah, I want to just point that out. It's a great resource. You kind of
you mentioned Vera Kichanova. Yeah, I think she was the one who was writing this a publication for the Institute for Economic Affairs in London, which is called Beyond Freeports. I just put it up here. Revitalizing Britain with Self-Governing Cities. And it's from January 25. So everybody can download this, distribute it in your circles. Yes. And then we have, again, as Patrik said, we have the Free Cities Foundation. There's a website, free-cities.org. And there is an article about this paper, so short form, which is called Bringing Free Cities to Established but Stagnating Democracies, Starting from Britain. So, I mean, you should distribute that. I put it here in the chat.
Yeah. Because there's this kind of project I was contacted called Forest City. Somebody wants to build a new, the Labour is talking about new towns, but there's this guy who wants to shift Malek. I'm in contact with him. Forest City. It's a kind of special economic zone. They want to have tax exemptions and other kind of exemptions, and they want to place it between Milton Keynes and Cambridge. Let's see. Labour is obviously not usually the right environment, but they're so desperate to get any development going because development has absolutely ground to halt that maybe there's a chance. I don't know. Let's see.
I think, Alex, it's just because obviously you're now you're much more in contact with the pulse of the nation. I seem to have real problems because if in Britain, when I was living there, the only thing that I found practically impossible was trying to explain to people that are born native British people exactly why the system of the Krankenkasse in Germany or something similar that is in the Netherlands is actually much better than having a single payer system where you see, because you have competition. Because when I was living in Germany, I lived for around 5 or 6 years. I changed probably 3 Krankenkasse because obviously they kept raising the premium, and so I would just say, well, I don't know, the other one, the Technische Krankenkasse, maybe it's better. and the service was pretty much the same. So if you have this idea of private equal unjust, private equal privilege and stuff, instead, private means that if I have a private pension and the insurance company doesn't pay me, I can sue them. If the government decides that I will retire when I'm 75, there is nothing I can do because the government decided for the common good. So I don't know. Can you see some inroads for that? Because I don't know exactly. How can you sell this idea?
Well, I've been sitting here for the last 40 minutes taking an A4 page size of notes, absolutely loving this. Titus, you mentioned that, it's a very hard sell for politicians in the UK because they don't want to listen. I can tell you much of this is going straight into our manifesto, subject, of course, to votes. In terms of selling it, we do certainly need to, you mentioned that we cannot get a libertarian revolution via the ballot box. I would stress that the Libertarian Party is fundamentally committed to democracy. It's not a great system, but it's the system we have to work within. And we're a democratic organization. We're certainly not going to stop fighting elections anytime soon. And we do support democracy in that sense. The free cities concept, I think that the core of it is the voluntary nature of the relationships that exist within them. So we had, as we are all aware, the budget last week, and Rachel Reeves came out the day after and said, "I'm asking you to make a contribution." Well, she's not asking, is she? Taxation under threat of imprisonment for not paying is not a request. It's a forced situation. So under the free cities concepts, you've got that voluntary association and the market competition. We talked about cities in, Luca, you mentioned the situation in Germany where you have different suppliers. We mentioned the cities in medieval Europe, and that is what's going to lead to improvements in terms of service provision. One potential inroad with the left is public services are on their knees in this country because they are state funded, because they are centralized. If we began to see, some of these private cities, as we know, they could move more to the left, hopefully not full on communism, but let them try. It might last 2 months, if that. But regardless, you're going to see different models operating different levels of healthcare. In an ideal scenario, once we get to that point, I know it needs to be a graduated approach because we need to talk about legal issues. But certainly this is something that the Libertarian Party can absolutely put our weight behind, looking at these free cities, because the social contract is a myth. When you have taxation forced upon people, when people are born within the boundaries of a state and they are told, right, you're funding this and that, you've got no option, you've got no competition. As we said, the special economic zones, the port zones, they are not true competition in the sense of different legal systems, so on and so forth. But one question I had, a little concern or a query for both yourself, Titus, and Patrik. We support constitutional safeguards for individual liberty. Now, these would be upheld by a constitutional court. We would change the House of Lords into a constitutional court. I'm just going to throw in a quick advert here. We are currently debating our constitution policy, open up to all members. Please do get in touch by email if you'd like to be involved. But how would, Titus, how would you see, who would arbitrate on disputes of a constitutional nature, say a free city decided voluntarily to adopt a communist or a fascist authoritarian society, or even say an ethno-nationalist, we only allow people of a certain ethnicity, so on and so forth. How, if we had a national codified constitution, would you consider it acceptable to ask these free cities to operate within the remit of that? And what I would ask is, how is it going? You mentioned there's one project in Brunei. Now, Brunei is, much like the United Arab Emirates, a socially conservative religious society. How do we balance the conflict between individual rights within a free city when we also require nationwide constitutional safeguards?
Yeah, very, very reasonable questions. And these are indeed I would say, biggest challenges we have is to find a compromise between those two. Like in the case of Brunei, the idea of the country was to open itself up, but still keep their culture. So I can't say much to the details because I'm bound by confidentiality, but in the next months, we'll probably publish something together with the government. And then you can then see what kind of compromise was made there. But I think this is only possible if a government is in principle okay to grant certain liberties, which was the case here, and it's the same with other countries. In most countries, they would, especially democratic countries, they would say, but it still has to be in line with the constitution and the international agreements that the country has conducted. So there is no full autonomy. There's a partial autonomy, but it's possible to grant internal autonomy for most things. In principle, free cities can take every shape if you only want a certain ethnicity, a certain religion, or whatever. But in today's, because this is a voluntary association, right? So it's not. This is a difference if you create a new society, say these are the rules and we only accept people from this and that background, towards, say, a city like London saying, okay, now we become a fully Islamic city, because then you would force all the people who are against that either out or to live against their conviction. So that's not possible in a free city. You know in advance what the rules are. If you don't like it, just don't go there. And insofar, at the moment, and this is also something that the UK could do, creating free cities or free city types in the free special economic zones that you already have within the constitutional borders that you have. But there's also possibility to change constitutions, right? So you can say, that's what Honduras has done, has said, okay, we are allowing in a certain area that other legal systems can be tried out, like common law, right? This is possible if you have the majority for constitutional amendment. I would recommend to do that. If you don't have, then you have to see what the simple law allows and makes possible. It's mostly quite a lot. Coming back to your initial question, we do in Germany, we do have a constitutional courts. In the US, you have a constitutional courts. Does it help much? No, because the parties are sending their people in it, and they try to if they have a left majority, they have decisions to the left, and if they have the right majorities, then you have decisions to the right. So that doesn't really solve your problem. How do we deal with it in free cities? We say, okay, we recognize, we acknowledge the problem that we have by creating our own dispute resolution court system. And then if anybody has a problem with us as an operator, we go to this very courts that we have established and we are paying. There's obviously a problem. That's also a problem of contemporary systems. So our solution is different. We say for each lawsuit, for each dispute that people in our free city have amongst each other, there's a default court established. There's a default court or alternative dispute resolution established for the cases that the parties cannot agree on any other dispute resolution system. This is the fallback situation, the default court. But if they have a problem with me as an operator, it's a totally different setup. We would go to an outside court, arbitration panel institution that is not part of my organization. Established arbitration institutions like in London, Paris, Singapore, Washington. And if you as as a citizen even are mistrusting those institutions, you have the right to call for an ad hoc arbitration. Ad hoc arbitration means you have a case against me, you nominate one arbiter, I nominate one, and they agree on a chairperson. And then this gremium agrees on the procedural and everything. That is already existing. It's called ad hoc arbitration, and that I would offer to my citizens as well. So that the best protection you have is in from independent dispute resolution, because in my model there is no parliament, there's no parties, the rules are clear, the rules are very limited, and every further development of rules, because there are gaps, you can't avoid them, they will be solved by case law, and you are protected by your contract. And if you think that I'm violating your contract, you go to outside dispute resolution that is not part of my organization, because this is a big problem, and it's totally unsatisfying what we have here in the Western world. Of course, in other places it's even more unsatisfying, but the Western world was the poster child of rule of law and independent courts, which is not the case any longer.
No, especially if you have someone that decides that probably, yeah, well, we'll get rid of the, trial by jury. Who cares? I mean, it's only 1,000 years old. It's only the thing that made Britain what Britain is. But in general, I was just thinking of one thing, because these international cities, they look like a solution for anywhere people. I don't know if you're familiar with the distinction between somewhere people and anywhere people. Anywhere people are just like people that, know several languages, they've got marketable skills, they are pretty much in demand, so they can pick and choose. They can say, well, I don't really like my employer taking away the passport from me, so I'm not going to Doha. I'm not going to Qatar because, I don't know, I can get stuck there. It happened to a friend of mine. So, again, I would much rather go to Singapore. But I know that in Singapore, if I just litter and stuff, I get caned. So you know it in advance. But someone that is really attached to their native land and everything, I don't know if this system could also work for them, because it doesn't mean that, I don't know, Nottingham can decide we will just incorporate ourselves and decide on a set of rules and so ask for special status. That could be a solution.
This is something, I mean, for me, it's at least an improvement, right? If you say it's only for the anniversary. Normally, people say it's only for the rich. That's what I constantly hear when I say, hey, look, it's £1,500 per year. Is it possible that this is for the rich only? And the rich have already 22 jurisdictions where there's no direct taxation. They have their yachts. They don't need free cities. The anywhere thing is true for the first movers, but it's not true for the people who are coming later. And we can not only point to the Middle Ages, we can point to Honduras today. What happened in Prosper, where I was involved, is in creating it. In the beginning, yes, there was the typical digital nomads, hardcore libertarians, expats, anywhere people coming. But then middle-class people from Honduras were coming because they were just seeing that there are better job opportunities. And then in the third wave, everybody else was coming from the whole world. Now, then you have another special administrative region in Honduras. It's called Morazan, which is 99% Honduran workers. Because this is a free city created for lower income classes, for industrial workers. They have a lot of advantages. The idea was to put companies in there and people living there. People have a much better environment than in outside of these zones in Honduras, because they pay rent $150 per month for a 60 square meter small flat for a family with air conditioning, washing machine, electricity, everything. security included in the price, and they have infrastructure and safety and everything. And this was so successful that even after the socialist government threatens the cities in Honduras, and the companies were afraid and left, the people were still coming because it's so much better than what they have on the outside. And even simple things like we can sit under a street light in the dark and grill. It's impossible outside because nobody's going out at dark because of the gangs. So you can see that with very easy market-oriented mechanisms, you can create a better product for all kinds of income classes. And my prediction is that if we establish an international city in Brunei, a lot of international people will come, but eventually the majority of the people will be people from Brunei. And this is the same in Prospera. This is even more so in Morazan, because this mentality that you are just living here for a year and then go somewhere else is fine, but that's not what we need. We need people who stay. And I think over time, then there will be a mindset created, a kind of pride for what people have achieved. They're sharing the same values, like in Singapore, right? People feel I'm Singaporean. I'm proud to be a Singaporean. And they also started as a big mixture and a secession from Malaysia. So what we can probably create is a kind of local patriotism for your city. But on the other hand, there will always be a group of people who especially like the fact that international cities are happening in several places all over the world. That's at least the plan. And you can easily switch from one to another. But again, this is probably a minority. I'm relatively sure that the majority of people will be local people that are not moving around much.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. And I think at the same time, you should, anywhere people assume not derogatory, it has some interest. And also what you're pointing to here, you are building a kind of system which could have various franchises and various settlements discontinuously and being united by some kind of business model where the kind of all the work which goes in and the discovery process and kind of refining the core processes, the different offerings, the price points relative to service points, that you can explore that and then roll it out and adapt it to individual conditions. I mean, the other thing is so fantastic. It's a market for living together, but it's also an investable company, right? So because this at the moment that market has not many players with the capacity. I think that was a problem also Honduras was facing. They're writing these data laws and then opening this up. There's not players who have thought about it and who have built up the capacity to think this through, and that's where you're a pioneer, and I think that's very important. I also wanted to go back to Alex's question. I mean, he started to saying, we as libertarian, we're democratically grounded and we believe in democracy. Personally, I'm not 100% aligned with that, but you are making the point here that in terms of your model, and you see the success of Monaco, and maybe it's more of a kind of corporate entity which is actually the absence of democratic process, one of the selling points. On the other hand, one could say, well, but what if there is some kind of need to adjust, if there's historical transformation, new dynamics, new challenges? How would you adapt some of the products and contracts? You would have to go to literally to everybody. So the question is, I can imagine that in this world of competing free private cities, that there will be some who have certain degrees of democracy, maybe a lightweight minarchist kind of situation with some representative democracy, or just allowing for referenda. And I've been looking at the crypto ecosystem that is exploding, these DAOs, and how they're differently managed, the privileges and leadership competencies of the founders, and how you bring in investors, and maybe with voting rights. So they have, at the moment, you have citizens with various degrees of property. You have investors coming in, obviously developing governance structure. So I was wondering, I think the world is very, very complex. And you, at the moment, you make a very simple proposition, which assumes a certain stability, that this kind of relying only on the common law evolution of your basic courts to make these adaptations. I think that's legitimate. I just want to throw in one more reference, Hans-Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed, and showing this kind of monarchies as a similar model to a kind of family business, a kind of corporation, a for-profit corporation, which is maybe the best vehicle for also delivering this world of kind of quasi-politics. But still, I think there is a challenge to those who find it hard to give up on democracy and as a mechanism of somehow making adjustments. So I want to kind of ask you to come back on that, Titus.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big questions of today's world, right? And Alex made it very clear that in the current environment, the Libertarian Party is they are committed to accept, acknowledge the democratic system and work within the system. The main criticism of democracy is that you can vote other people's money in your pockets. That is the main thing. If you can stop that, then we can talk about democracy. And I think there's also another point which is very true, is the moment somebody is changing the rules, then there's room for democracy. Because why should I change the rules against your will, right? And democracy, you have at least the majority behind you, which can then force everything they want up on the minority, which is also not ideal. But the idea to limit the majority by constitutional restraints has failed, right? So you can try it again, Alex. It's not going to work. And so far you have to, and I think a potential answer is more decentralization. That you say you have more rights for democratic decisions on a local level. Now coming back to our cities, if you accept the theoretical figure that in a free private city, according to my model, you know the rules in advance, so there's no need for democracy because nobody should have the right, neither me nor the majority, to change the rules. So there's no need for democracy. The moment there's a change of rules, we have to discuss about democracy because who is making the call? And this is indeed happening already, even in Honduras, in the Prospera model, because there's a point that it has been a while that I was involved, but it's like that if there is a new rule introduced by the city council, then there's a possibility of a referendum to reject it, right? So there's no possibility of a referendum to create all kinds of new taxes and redistribution or any laws, but there's a referendum only to reject things. That is already existing. The same mechanism we have in international cities. If there's an emergency like a war or a blockade or whatever calamity requiring additional regulation, that is possible in very rare circumstances, can be challenged legally at any time, but there's also the possibility of the referendum to reject this. So we do have democratic elements. The other thing that Patrik is referring to is I've written this book, Free Private Cities, Making Governments Compete for You, not to show the world that I'm the superior thinker and I found the solution to all problems. No, I just say this is my product, but there may be a lot of variations. And since people are different, there is probably not one product that fits all. And insofar, I'm discussing in this book, in which direction could it be changed? And if you look at the current discussion, Curtis Gebel, and then Curtis Jarvin, right? So this is
Curtis Jarvin,
and the monarchy of Hopper. These are top-down solutions. I don't want them. I want to create a framework which is I'm as a service provider say, you don't have to care for protection of life, liberty, and property, but for the rest, you are your own sovereign. You make the decision, not the big guy on the top. So this is the first difference. And then you have, of course, the democracy elements. Then you have people in our movement, let's call it that way, they say we want this decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs, like Wyoming has it in their legislation, in their laws already. So that means everybody is voting, and only the people that pay something are then entitled to make it happen. So this is an element of democracy that some of the people in our movement want to integrate. Others have this liquid democracy where you're voting on everything. Again, I don't think it's a good idea, because there's no need to vote on everything. And why should other people decide about my life? Why should I decide about other people's life? So that is the thing. But if you go to democracy, then you can say, yeah, but we have democracy in the way that the company that owns the free city and operates it has a shareholder democracy, or even it's a corporation where everybody has one vote. It's owned by the citizens itself. It's all possible. And that is not a problem. The problem only starts if on that level, who's operating a city, any organizational form is possible. But on the level of the citizens, you must have this equal at arm's length standing, so that there's a contract which is based on reciprocity, and it's for both parties the same. That means it's not possible that one party says we are more, we're changing the rules. That shouldn't be possible, even if they make their internal decision making in a cooperative. The free city is a cooperative. Then the cooperative still has the bilateral contract with every citizen and is bound to that contract. And that is the main protection of the individual. It's the individual contract. And maybe there will be a time, Alex, when we have individual contracts in the UK protecting each citizen against their government, which is, and you still have your constitution, right? Or the constitution you're going to establish, and then you have both, right? That maybe is an idea, is a transitional period, and I fully agree, Patrik. There will be different types of free cities. There already are different types of free cities. And some will have more democratic elements, others less. And as my friend Joe Quirk from the Seasteading Institute said, in 50 years, the most successful cities will probably cater to none of the today existing ideologies. They will come up with something completely new. And why not? Because the learning curve is much steeper if we have 2,000 different systems. 1,000 of them are free cities of any kind, and the rest are legacy systems, than what we have today, where we have nearly 200 states, but I would say 80% of them are following exactly the same model. So there's not really choice. And
I mean, I just want to come in. It gave me a kind of question, an idea that if you're talking about individual contracts between the individual citizen and participant and the corporation and the provider, you could obviously imagine, I wonder if you thought about it, that these literally could be individually crafted. Of course, it makes sense to have certain standards, but maybe you have more than one offering. And I'm thinking about, also at company level, we would like to have free contracting, and we have certain standard contracts that might be different for different functional groups, different for different levels. And you can trade off. We actually had this conversation with Mark Littlewood. For instance, with respect to employment law, you start with a bundle, but you trade off, and you trade more protection against less salaries, more insecurity for more salary. And so would you contemplate that? I find it fascinating that when you say individual contracts, that they could actually have a degree of individualization potentially, but then you end up with kind of certainly, to a certain extent, unequal conditions, but maybe that's not a problem.
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. I mean, there are already in special economic zones are different types of contracts, because the companies that are bringing a lot of jobs and investment, they normally get better rules. But the question is, if you really it's creating not only the inequality, which might be found unjust, but it's also creating a lot of legal issues. If you have certain traffic rules, for a simple example, you have in your contract, it says, okay, the traffic rules is one of the areas that the operator can just set. You have no say in that. And then you say, okay, but for me, the traffic rules do not apply, right? Because you have a special contract. And then that creates all kinds of problem in daily life. But I think we will have this to a certain degree, but there will also be places like ours who say, no, everybody has the same contract. But that only applies if you have signed a contract in a certain period of time, because we will find out, like with any contract, there are some weaknesses in the contract, and then we are going to change the contracts of the newcomers. And so we don't have to change the contract of the original people, because we can't change the contract unilaterally, as I said before. So, but this is how you do it, how you handle these issues. And then you have slightly different contracts over the years. But the main, I would say, main rights and obligations, they will certainly stay the same. But Patrik, I don't know. We will see what the future brings.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we will also see, Alex, we see settlements of like-minded, of same ethnicity, same religion people. Who are we that we are preventing people from associate with each other as they like? It's not. We have not the right to do that. If people want that, they should do that. And we will also see Google towns where you have to accept every change in rules that Google comes up with, like we have changed our terms, accept or we kick you out, right? So this is, you're totally to the subject of these big companies. And who is doing that? Well, anybody who is accepting a benefit, like Google has to give something in exchange, like in universal basic income. And that's going to happen. I'm relatively sure. It will be a shit society. I don't want to be part of that. But people will go there because they get something for free. Not so much different from what we have today.
No, but I think it's really good to have a conversation about this framework, because this framework can be used to actually tackle some really big problems. As in, right now, the housing market is completely gone. If you are 25 and you have a reasonable job, graduated, you've done everything that you were supposed to, and then you want to get into the property ladder, it's impossible in most cities. So I don't know, maybe there is in an area that is not developed or it has some problems, they say, well, we will create an international city there, and then you will have the chance to just, I don't know, buy a house or build a house that is much less expensive. But then you will trade off. You will trade off a little bit of freedom. You will trade off a little bit of so-called democracy and stuff in order to get access to an area where there are, and obviously companies will go there because you will have workers there. And then again, like it happened in Honduras, it can very well happen in the UK. It just depends on finding the right way to just propose that to the public. Because if you try to do that, I can hear them right now, the lefties and communists and stuff, they were saying, they're going to go ballistic and saying, you want to enslave people, you want to take away their freedom and stuff.
We have done all this in Honduras, so we know what's going to come, right? But I think over time, the big argument that we have is, what I tell them, the lefties, in any discussion is, okay, what's exactly is your problem with people voluntarily deciding that they want to try out a new system? What's your problem? And they don't really have an answer other than people are obliged to give away parts of their wealth to the common good and cannot just escape in such an island. But this is not really plausible, because that means you have to hold back people by force, like in East Germany, in the Eastern Bloc, behind the Iron Curtain, and I think their arguments are getting weaker every day. So it's a little bit like the libertarians have already a long time delivered the solutions to housing problem and everything, and we just can apply it, Luca, correctly. We can apply it in such environments, and then let people vote by their feet. And I mean, the decision is very clear. If you look what's happening in Dubai, or I live in Monaco, a lot of people are saying, okay, here's the balance. Or even if you go to Switzerland, if you as an English person go to Switzerland, you are not entitled to vote. You have no democracy as a foreigner. And still people are going there. And the same is true in Monaco. 80% of the people in Monaco are not entitled to vote. There is a parliament in Monaco. It's not only the prince. But they're not entitled to vote. The same in Dubai. Nobody's entitled to vote. Do they care? No. Because it's a trade-off. They say, okay, it's still a better system. It's still a better system. And if we can now offer the economic freedom of these places with political individual freedom, which is not so much there, but to a degree, but we can have the libertarian dream world, individual and economic freedom, and we have an operator who is staying away from 90% of what you're doing. That is my offer. This is a very libertarian offer to the world, and then we see what the public will say to it. And I'm relatively sure, every year I'm more sure, that we can compete with the existing systems.
I mean, I was thinking, I'm talking about markets and discourses, right? So I believe that when you have your project and there's a few others, and then there's some critical accompanying scholarly and political discourse, and if people have this kind of urge to be politically active, not just withdrawn to the private life for their own benefit, obviously they can also join the leadership of one of these projects. Sure. And think about how to improve these contracts, how to make adjustments. Granted, yes, that you can't maybe go back to an original population of contracts, but I think there's an outlet in this world for political spiritedness and civic spiritedness and wanting to think about the order of society and so on. And that's what brought you to this. I mean, this is obviously a high risk political venture, and I sometimes have this, you see this kind of tension, and with a lot of libertarians, they think about the future of their society as a purely driven by markets, and everybody is withdrawing their private lives and doing their self-centered businesses and maybe attend their garden. But no, I think it's also a wonderful kind of entrepreneurial project, markets for living together, but also think about constitutions, think about how to improve the overall welfare through a model which then kind of proliferates. And this is really about human organization and understanding psychology and economics and incentives and all that wonderful science and discourse, which I'm excited about, and that should have an outlet and actually put in a much more expanded outlet in this world of libertarian projects, instead of having to channel that into parties and one bundle, every 4 years an election, and then having kind of having to one fits all forced majoritarian dictates where there's only a few things which happen rather than a kind of a multitude of things happening. And I think that is what I wanted to say, that this is it's not a kind of withdrawal into the sense of the private, but there's still this kind of thing of the civic project. One can participate, for instance, in founding another of those, or joining the discourse or joining the leadership and aspiring to become the next CEO or at Tipolis, for instance.
It can become a wonderful world of diversity, because it's exactly true what you said. First of all, there will not be one project for all. Second, people don't want the freedom very often, right? They prefer living under the rule of Google if they're getting said what they have to do, but they are also getting free lunch and they're feeling safe. That's fine, right? As long as the choice is voluntary, it's not to us to judge over these people. And then I made the point in my book, even the same person might change their preferences during lifetime, right? Maybe let's say in 50 years from now, we have all kind of societies in a market of living together. If you're a young person, you might be inclined to go to this more left-leaning communitarian system where there's no private property, but you can have sex with everyone, right? So you try this out if you're young. Then if you're a bit older, you say, now I really want to make money. You go to the libertarian free private city of Titus Gebel. And then if you're old, they say, oh, no, I want to be among my peers. You go to the white Christian conservative community, whatever, where it is, right? That can, even in a lifetime, there's no one model fits all. And in so far, this is not a problem, because that's a good thing. And
but there is, that's the whole discourse. I believe, I would predict that those libertarian places are the one which actually drive the prosperity.
Yeah,
and then people can retire
absolutely
and eat that. And maybe the communist projects have, sponsors like Bill Gates who've made their money in the libertarian. They then kind of charitably sponsor a bit of a youth experiment. But the prosperity engines freedom will have a huge role to play in driving these prosperity engines. And in the end, this will also be the weeding out between those kind of delusional project, or which need to continuously resource transfers, for instance, from the retirees or from the sponsors.
But Elon Musk is saying, no, we have so many robots and AI, nobody has to work any longer, right? But still, some people want to have more than others, so there will be people working, and you're right, they will create value in these libertarian-oriented entities. But there are a lot of people who say we don't want to create additional value. We are happy with what we have. And that's also perfectly fine. I think the libertarians have to acknowledge that not all people think like they do, and that they, as anybody else, do not have the recipe for the perfect system. But what we libertarians have to insist is that we do not stop people voluntarily associating with each other and trying out new systems. This is our human right, and we insist on that. And you can do your own system. We have no problem with that, but you should also be okay with us trying out our system. And this is, I think, the biggest political, I would say, claim that we can make today. And it's hard to argue against that, because it's 100% voluntary participation.
Yeah, I know, but that's the main problem. The main problem is that, as they say, if you don't care about politics, politics will care about you. And that is the main problem. Because if you're going there and I say, leave me alone, I don't want to work, I don't care what you do in your bedroom, I don't care what you do with your money, I don't care about anything, just leave me alone. Problem is, they are not leaving you alone. They want to impose how to live, how to run your society, how you manage your wealth, where you can move, how you can move. And that is the problem. That's why I think right now, I'm very fascinated by the international cities model and the opportunity that it can give. But this doesn't discount the fact that we still need a political representation, and that we still need to just join together and spread the word about freedom and everything, because otherwise we will be at the mercy of governments who will decide that you're not allowed to have your house, you're not allowed to move to Monaco.
Yeah, but this is okay. We can stop your government from not letting you go, but this is, if you are in an international city, that is exactly our job, that we shield you from that influence, and we're doing this by having a enforceable contract with the government. Now, what happened in Honduras? Exactly the same thing. You want to be left alone, but government doesn't want to leave you alone. So, but until today, they have not dared to go into the zone and tear down the buildings or something like that. So the people in the zone, until today, and now we have just elected a new government, which is more pro-business than the old one in Honduras. The people were shielded by Prospera against socialist government in Honduras, and they have survived 4 years now without being infiltrated. And that's exactly possible because there's an agreement between the government and Prospera, or a law in favor of Prospera. And Prospera could sue, which they did, sue Honduran government in front of the International Arbitration Center in Washington for billions of dollars, and this is our sharpest sword, Luca, and that is something. And it's probably there are some other mechanisms that can protect you, but this is exactly our main purpose and main justification, that we are protecting you exactly from these things that you cannot control, that suddenly they want to do something with you. And it's not easy, and we cannot shield you 100%, but I think it's that's exactly the reason for our existence.
Okay, lovely. So it's been a great conversation. I would just like to thank you all. It's been already 90 minutes plus. We could go on forever, but of course, everybody's got a very busy life. So I would just like to thank you all for being here. So thanks again to Dr. Titus Gebel. Thank you very much. And just to remind, just one simple thing, I was saying, I live in Monaco, and I was thinking about München. And I lived in it's just that in Italian it's Monaco.
You're Italian, right? Yeah. It's
yes.
No, it's the Monte Carlo Monaco, not the Monaco di Bavaria. I had this problem several times already. So
yeah, because I was just thinking to myself, and I'm thinking, okay,
what's so special about Munich?
I can vote in Monaco. I can vote in Monaco, but it's just München. Okay, thank you, Patrik. Thank you, Patrik Schumacher, for being here. Thanks again, and obviously thank you to Alex. Alex, I don't know, just maybe you haven't talked as much as you could have, as you should have.
I've been enjoying it, just listening to fantastic ideas. So thank you, everyone.
So thanks, everyone. Obviously, the biggest thanks of all, it goes to all our audience. Thanks all for being here. Again, we are just changing the date and time so often. It's just because we want to have a live show, because we wanted to have people and we wanted to have interaction and stuff. But I can understand that it's really difficult to grow a podcast like this. So we'll probably try to find a solution to just record our shows, and the shows will be out. But then again, if you have anything to ask, if you prefer these live events, even if it changes the time and everything, just let us know. Drop us a comment on the YouTube channel, or maybe go to the Facebook page of the Libertarian Party UK or the X account and everything. So again, we don't know exactly when it will be the next episode, also because we're getting into late December and everybody's going on vacation and stuff, but we hope to have you again here. And obviously, I thank you all for being here, and I'll just give you the chance to meet you again next time. God only knows what. So thanks again.